What if someone had been living inside your home for months, watching you eat, listening to you sleep, moving through the spaces you thought were yours alone, and you never knew? And what if, on the night they finally acted, the people tasked with finding the truth did everything in their power to make sure it was never found? In the final days of March 1922, on a remote farmstead in the Bavarian countryside, roughly 40 miles north of Munich, 6 people were beaten to death with a mattock, a short-handled farm tool used for breaking hardened soil. The victims were Andreas Gruber, age 63, his wife Cecilia, 72, their widowed daughter Victoria Gabriel, 35, Victoria's daughter, also named Cecilia, 7 years old, Victoria's infant son Joseph, just 2, and the family's new maid Maria Baumgartner, 44. Maria had arrived at Hinterkaifeck that afternoon. She had been on the job for a matter of hours. Her sister, who had walked her to the farm and stayed briefly before leaving, was almost certainly the last person to see any of them alive. But it was what happened after the murders that has made this case unlike any other in European criminal history. The killer did not flee. For at least 3 days following the slaughter of 6 human beings, someone remained at the farmstead. They ate the family's food. They slept in the family's beds. They stoked the fireplace. They fed the cattle and tended to the livestock. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney throughout the weekend. Whoever had done this did not run. They settled in. They made themselves at home among the dead. The bodies were not discovered until April 4th, 4 days after the murders. 7-year-old Cecilia had missed school without explanation on the 1st. The family failed to appear at church on Sunday. Their mail began to pile up at the post office. A local mechanic named Albert Hofner arrived at the farm that Tuesday morning to repair an engine. He waited an hour for someone to appear. Nobody did. He completed the repair alone and left after 4.5 hours without seeing a single member of the household. It was not until late that afternoon that a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer, who had once courted Victoria and was widely believed to be Joseph's father, sent his teenage son and young stepson to check on the family. When they reported finding no one, Schlittenbauer recruited 2 other neighbors, Michael Pöll and Jakob Siegel, and went to Hinterkaifeck himself. The 3 men found the door to the barn blocked. They had to force a gate open to enter. Inside, beneath a mound of hay, they found 4 bodies stacked on top of one another: Andreas, his wife Victoria, and the little girl. Each had been struck repeatedly in the skull. The elder Cecilia showed signs of strangulation and bore 7 separate blows to her head. Her skull cracked open. Andreas's face was so badly damaged that his cheekbones protruded through the torn skin. Victoria's head bore 9 distinct star-shaped wounds. The child's lower jaw had been shattered, and a deep wound ran across her throat. Inside the house, they found Maria dead in her bedroom and the infant Joseph killed in his crib. But it was the autopsy findings regarding 7-year-old Cecilia that would prove the most difficult for investigators to speak about afterward. She had lain in the straw beside the bodies of her mother and grandparents for hours, alive, bleeding, unable to move or call for help. When her body was found, small bloody fingerprints marked her face and neck, and tufts of her own hair were clutched in her fists. She had torn them from her own scalp as she lay dying in the dark, surrounded by the people who were supposed to protect her. Müller concluded she had survived for 2 to 3 hours after the attack. Hardened investigators who worked the case would later say this single detail was the worst thing they encountered in their careers. The Hinterkaifeck farmstead, situated between the Bavarian towns of Ingolstadt and Schrobenhausen, had been built around 1863. The name itself came from its location, Hinter meaning behind, and Kaifeck being the nearest hamlet. The property was approximately 1 mile north of any neighbor, bordered by dense forest. It was a place where a person could vanish, or, as events would suggest, a place where a person could appear without being noticed. The Gruber family was not well liked. Andreas was known as a domineering recluse who beat his wife and children. In 1915, he and his daughter Victoria had been convicted of incest by the Neuburg District Court after an anonymous report. Andreas served a year in prison. Victoria served either a month or a year, depending on which records are consulted. The abuse did not end with the conviction. In 1919, Victoria reportedly confided to Schlittenbauer that her father's sexual abuse had continued and that the infant Josef had been conceived as a result. Whether this was true or a desperate attempt to explain her pregnancy remains debated. What is not debated is that the household was fractured, secretive, and governed by a man who controlled his daughter through violence. In the months preceding the murders, strange occurrences began at the farm. About 6 months before, the Gruber's original maid, a woman named Crescens Rieger, had quit. She told people she had heard footsteps in the attic, that objects had been moved, that the house felt watched. She believed the farm was haunted. Andreas dismissed her fears as superstition. In March of 1922, he found a Munich newspaper on the property that no one in the family had purchased. The local postman confirmed that no one in the area subscribed to it. Then, just days before the murders, Andreas discovered something far more alarming: a set of footprints in fresh snow leading from the edge of the forest to the farm's machine room, whose lock had been broken weeks earlier. The prints led in, none led back out. Andreas searched the machine room, the barn, and the house. He found no one. But that night the family again heard footsteps in the attic, and again a search revealed nothing. Around the same time, several house keys went missing. Andreas told his neighbors about all of this. He told a hardware merchant. He told Schlittenbauer. He told anyone who would listen. But he refused offers of help. He did not report a single incident to the police. Within days, every person in that house was dead. The investigation that followed was, by any reasonable measure, a catastrophe. The nearest police department was in Munich, 45 miles away. Inspector Georg Reingruber did not arrive until the day after the bodies were discovered. By then, dozens of curious locals had walked through every room of the farmstead, touching objects, moving furniture, tracking mud across floors that might have held footprints. According to multiple accounts, some of them even cooked and ate meals in the kitchen. The crime scene was irreparably contaminated before any trained investigator set foot inside. And then there was the behavior of Schlittenbauer himself. Multiple witnesses noted that upon finding the 4 bodies stacked in the barn, he displayed remarkably little distress. He then walked to the front door of the house, and in full view of his companions, unlocked it with a key he already had in his possession. He was never able to provide a satisfactory explanation for how he came to have this key. He entered the house alone and remained inside for some time before others arrived. It was he who disturbed the bodies in the barn, pulling them from beneath the hay, repositioning them, in what he claimed was an effort to check for survivors. Whether this is true, or whether he was tampering with the arrangement of a crime scene he already knew intimately, is a question that has followed his name for over a century. More than 100 suspects were interrogated over the decades that followed. Vagrants, traveling craftsmen, former soldiers, neighbors, relatives. None were charged. The police initially suspected robbery, but this was quickly abandoned when they found that a substantial sum of money, which would have been easily located by any intruder, had not been touched. Political motives were considered. A suspect named Adolf Gomp was identified as early as April 9th, just a week after the discovery, due to his connections to the Freikorps Oberland, a far-right paramilitary organization active during the volatile early years of the Weimar Republic. This lead, too, went nowhere. One of the more persistent theories involved Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, who had been reported killed at the Battle of Arras on December 12, 1914. His body was supposedly identified by 2 fellow soldiers, but some researchers questioned whether the identification had been reliable. After the end of the Second World War, German prisoners released early from Soviet captivity claimed that a German-speaking Soviet officer had told them he was the Hinterkaifeck murderer. Some connected this officer to Gabriel, pointing to earlier reports that Gabriel had been seen alive after his supposed death and had expressed a desire to relocate to Russia. Several of these former prisoners later retracted their statements, and the lead dissolved. In 1925, 3 years after the murders and 2 years after the farmstead had been demolished, a local teacher named Hans Iblager stumbled upon Schlittenbauer standing among the ruins. When asked what he was doing there, Schlittenbauer reportedly pointed to an area of the cellar floor and stated that the killer's attempt to bury the bodies in the barn had been prevented by frozen ground. It was a remark that implied an unsettling degree of familiarity with conditions at the farm on the night of the murders. Schlittenbauer, for his part, maintained his innocence until his death in 1941. He sued multiple people for defamation over the years and won every case. No one could prove what everyone suspected. And then there is the matter of the evidence that no longer exists. In the immediate aftermath of the autopsies, the skulls of all 6 victims were removed from their bodies and sent to Munich. The stated purpose was forensic analysis, but in practice the skulls were handed to a clairvoyant named Helene Jürgens, reportedly at the request of a local court bailiff, hoping to claim a reward that had been posted for information leading to the killer's arrest. The clairvoyant produced nothing of value. Over the following years, the skulls passed through the hands of at least 3 separate psychics. None offered anything useful. The skulls were never returned to the bodies. They were supposed to be eventually. But in the chaos of the Second World War, they were lost. To this day, the 6 victims of Hinterkaifeck lie buried in a cemetery in Weidhofen without their heads. The farmstead itself was demolished in 1923, less than a year after the murders. The stated reason was that locals found it too disturbing to remain standing. But in the process of tearing the buildings down, workers discovered additional evidence that had been missed by the original investigation. A mattock caked in dried blood, hidden in the loft of the barn, very likely the murder weapon. They also found a penknife in the hay. Both items had been overlooked during the initial search. In 1971, a woman identified only as Therese T. wrote a letter claiming that as a 12-year-old girl, she had witnessed her mother receiving a visit from the mother of 2 brothers from a village called Sattelberg. The visiting woman allegedly stated that her sons had committed the Hinterkaifeck murders and that one of them regretted losing his penknife during the act. Investigators followed this lead. It produced nothing. By this point, the pattern was unmistakable. Every time a thread appeared, it was either pulled loose or cut. The skulls, lost. The crime scene, contaminated beyond recovery within hours. The farm itself, razed within a year. The most promising forensic evidence found only during demolition, long after the investigation had stalled. Suspects, dead before they could be charged. Witnesses, retracted or discredited. The bones of the case were systematically picked clean, not by conspiracy necessarily, but by a sequence of institutional failures so perfectly timed that the effect was indistinguishable from one. In 2007, students at the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy took the Hinterkaifeck murders on as a cold case study, applying modern criminal profiling methods and forensic analysis to the surviving evidence. They worked meticulously. They re-examined every suspect, every witness statement, every scrap of documentation that had survived a century. Their conclusion was stark. The case could never be definitively solved. Too much time had passed. Too much evidence had been lost or degraded. The original investigation had been too primitive, and every suspect from the era was long dead. But the students did agree unanimously on a single prime suspect. They believed they knew who had killed the Gruber family. Out of respect for that individual's living descendants, they declined to release the name. The identity of the likely murderer of 6 people, including a 7-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy, is known, and it is being withheld. The evidence exists, the conclusion has been reached, and it has been sealed indefinitely behind a wall of institutional courtesy. A century has passed. The farm is gone. The victims lie in the earth without their heads. The suspect is shielded by anonymity. The evidence that might have spoken has been lost to clairvoyance, to wartime chaos, to a demolition crew that arrived before the investigators finished their work. And somewhere in the Bavarian countryside, in a patch of ground that used to hold a barn where 4 bodies were stacked beneath straw, the silence still holds. Footprints leading in, none leading out. That was true of the killer. It is also true of the case itself.